So, by popular demand, we're going to try a new kind of seat-of-my-pants format here to play through Mr. President. Hopefully we can get at least a whole turn in. The turn, by the way, lasts 1 year, and I'm going to try and record these with as few mistakes as possible and then stitch everything together at the end, and you'll see the final result, and you'll need to let me know in the comments whether it's a shit show or whether it is in fact awesome and you would like to see me continue or do more of this kind of thing. So following on from last time, I have put some of the pool counters in the cups, and I think I do realize now why they're set up like that in pools on this display card instead of in cups, because the values are supposed to be hidden until they are revealed. You do draw one Exceptional White House Resource card at the beginning. This is Awesome Chief of Staff. That results in Cabinet Effectiveness Improving marker over here. And then once per turn, I can do a re-die roll. The whole setup indicates these are extra cups. We're not using those. The setup actually starts here. We've got the two displays, the two boards. I put the cards in this tray because they're sleeved and they're sliding all over the place. We got the 7 miscellaneous pools up here, and on the side table we got the dice tray and the 4-player aid cards and the flip book and the stack of 7.9 million books. So we're going to get started with the flip book. We're getting a lot of shadows here, which I'm not exceptionally pleased about. But basically this here is the turn sequence. It's a fairly detailed turn sequence, and you go this way, then this way, and then this way, and then this way, so on until the end of the turn. And the flip book basically takes us through all of these individual steps one at a time. So the first thing that we do is determine the number of action points that we get for the entire turn, and that is determined by the difficulty level. I'm playing on normal difficulty, so we have 10 APs from that, but we also have a cabinet effectiveness of 4, which gives us 2 extra APs per turn. I got to work on the shadow thing. So this will actually go up here. And then I think that this is actually this number plus 10, so we're at 17 APs for the turn. Public approval starts at 40%. Legacy points start at 5, which again I think is a function of the difficulty level. And otherwise, everything is pretty much set up as it should be for the start of the sandbox scenario. Counter trays over here. I'm going to be able to get the entire game into what looks like 2 or 3 of these, but I won't know now until I actually put everything away. I have an extra one up there that I will use, and then I've got another experimental tray. And between that and the card deck trays, that is the first of 2 card deck trays that I think will hold all the cards in the game. That should cover this entire game in 30 millimeters of box height. So one kind of important thing is that you can spend an AP to re-roll any roll that occurs as part of a master action. Master actions are the ones on these cards. So other than that, we're going to go through the sequence here when we'll start on page 4, as the turn sequence track suggests. So as previously discussed, we determine how many APs we start with. That number turns out to be 17. We also apply any effects, which I have already done, from Exceptional White House Resources. And then we get 3 things that you don't do on turn 1, so we're ignoring them for now. Next is to set focus regions for National Intelligence Collection. And there are kind of there's kind of one condition here. If both cyber warfare and strategic recon / intel, and those are strategic capabilities, are greater than or equal to both China's and Russia's values, then you get 2 of those, otherwise you get 1. So over here, looking at the strategic capabilities tracks, we are actually equal to, well, actually, we're behind both Russia and China in cyber warfare, and well ahead of them in strategic recon and intel gathering, but both of those things have to be equal to or above Russia and China in order to get 2 of those markers, so we will only get 1. So there are 11 different world regions in which we can potentially place this marker. That's actually not true. We cannot do it for China, Russia, or CONUS. That's the U.S. right here, which also includes Canada. We can put it anywhere else, which means there's 8 regions that we could put that in. Now, The Eurozone, you know, they got some issues up there. Central America's got some issues down there. South America's got some issues down there. And all the regions have issues, okay? However, the largest shit show by a pretty decent margin is the Middle East, which should not surprise us. So that is where we will put the Focused National Intel Collection token. Now, we do have this status markers for the Gulf states and for India. That just means that they are close allies or partners, if you will, as opposed to either estranged or, if you flip it over, very close. All right, since we're done with the initial phase, we'll move down to State of the Union, but we don't do that on turn one. We move down to SOE impact, which we don't do on turn one, but we do look to improve strategic capabilities, assuming that I am interpreting the flip book correctly, and I think I am, because everything else is clearly labeled, don't do this on turn one, and that one is not. All right, so if the U.S. state of the economy is 5 or higher, and it is 6, I get to roll for 2 different capabilities. If it is 4 or less, you only get 1. So we'll move over to that track and see what we're going to try to improve. So kind of evaluating the strategic capabilities situation here. We are ahead of the Russians and Chinese in Air Force training and tech, ground forces training and tech, naval forces training and tech. We are behind in cyber warfare to both Russia and China. We are somehow behind in space warfare. We're equal to Russia and behind the Chinese. In strategic missiles and missile defense, we're equal to Russia and ahead of the Chinese. And for strategic recon and intel gathering, we are ahead, again, well ahead of both. So I do feel like cyber warfare is an obvious place where we need to make a roll on. And then we will, in addition, I think, try to, because we want to like maintain the lead, right? So we will also roll on strategic missiles and missile defense. So I don't know that the book said this, but I believe that on a D10 roll, the 0 counts as 10, not as 0, because all the rolls say things like 1 to 5. So the way these rolls work is I roll 1 on each track that I've designated, and on a roll of 1 to 5, it goes up by 1. Now that range is increased to 1 to 7 if I have a DARPA marker in that track, but I do not have a DARPA marker in either track. So let's roll first for cyber warfare. We have rolled a 9, so we have, in fact, not caught up to the Russians or Chinese on that. And for strategic missile defense, let's roll there. We have rolled yet another 9, so we do not improve in either case. So that is the end of that particular phase, and we will go up over to the turn sequence and move us up to setting the POTUS and cabinet focus. Let's see how that works. All right, so how I believe this works is I've got these 6 markers, which I believe they're numbered, so I believe those represent a priority from 1 to 6. And there are 6 different areas in which I can put them: improving relations with Congress, the economy, homeland security, press and public relations, address domestic crises, and cabinet effectiveness. Now, we don't really have what I would consider a domestic crisis at the moment. Cabinet effectiveness would be nice. The economy is always a great idea. Homeland security is always a great idea. So we'll put 1 in homeland security. We'll put 2 in the economy. We'll put 3 improving relations with Congress. Possibly a dumb move. We'll put 4 in public and press relations. We'll put 6 in cabinet effectiveness and 5 in addressing domestic crises, just in case a domestic crisis should arise. So next I would remove any tension counters, remove 1 tension counter, and then we would move any remaining tension counters left over from last time next to the focus primary counters, starting with priority 6, then 5, then 4, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so I think we're done with that particular step. So the last thing that we do before the first activation phase is that we get one action for the POTUS and one for each cabinet member. Now, these, I believe, are supposed to be master actions. These are the ones on the cards. And who can do these depends on who we're talking about. So only POTUS, the Vice President, and the Secretary of State can use the diplomatic actions. Only POTUS and the Secretary of Defense can use the military actions. Only POTUS himself or herself can use these actions. Domestic master actions can be done by the POTUS, the Vice President, and the Chief of Staff. So what this sounds like is I'll be back in like 20 minutes after I've looked over all this stuff and try and figure out what I'm actually going to do with the 4 actions that we have. And, of course, in addition to the president, you have 4 cabinet members. These are the vice president. These are drawn randomly, more or less. If I do a setup video, if you'd like to see a setup video, make a comment in the comments below, and I will look at that after I have completed this single turn playthrough. We have a chief of staff, we have a secretary of state, and we have a secretary of defense. And each of them, plus the president, can perform an action here. All right, so the first action we're going to take is we're going to send the vice president to the Middle East to attempt to improve that region's alignment. Now, we choose a region and make a regional alignment check. That D18 does not mean a die 18, which is how I first interpreted it. It instead means page 18 in the domestic charts book. So we'll look at that in a second. If we pass, we place a trending pro-US. It's generally hard to move these tracks. We get a minus for the diplomatic rating of our Secretary of State, which is 1, and we get a +1 for each country if Russia or China has influence in the region. And Russia does have influence in the region. And I figure, without actually knowing, that cannot possibly be good. So let's pull up page D18 here, which is the second to last page in the book. Okay, so we are going to get a +1 and a -1. And it is actually table D18. Track checks. You'll be instructed to make a check. And I'm rolling a D10 if the result is greater than the current rating on the track. Regional alignment is 5 over there. So if it is greater than 5, we have failed. If it is less than or equal to, then we will pass. So we want less than or equal to 5. Russian or Chinese influence does not affect a straight regional alignment check in that region, as described above, but it does affect diplomatic master action number 2, which is what we're trying to do. So we are, in fact, at a +1, -1. So let's roll a D10 and see what we get. We got a 4. So we will move regional alignment of the Middle East up one place on the track to a 6. And that actually opens the door to do certain other things that I've noticed. And before I forget to do it, that task cost 1 action. So we now have 16 action points remaining. And of course I screwed that up. So this actually does not, Middle East does not actually go to 6 alignment. Instead, I put a trending pro-US counter on it. And if I get another of those results, then the marker goes away and it goes up. If I get an anti-US, the marker goes away and it stays where it is. So that is a fix to that. So that's the first rules mess up that I've done so far, I think. At least the first one that's been caught on film. So as part of the setup, we do start with domestic crisis level 1. Again, I assume that's bad. So we're going to do, as our second action, we are going to address a domestic crisis. The chief of staff is going to do this. And we make a cabinet effectiveness check. And this is exactly the same check that we did before. It's a roll against whatever the number is on the track. Our cabinet effectiveness is, in fact, a 4. So we need a 4 or less, and none of these DRMs actually apply. Vice President or Chief of Staff's domestic rating. We're using the Chief of Staff, who is John Long. The domestic rating is the first number on the counter, so they are not the optimal person to do this, but so that's a 0. And plus DRM from the current box on the LDI track. That's lingering domestic issues. That's actually a 0. And I guess what this track does is that if it gets too high, it will start to add DRMs that make it harder to get stuff done. So address domestic crisis is not the #1 cabinet focus. domestic focus is not a POTUS attribute that we have. We instead have Teflon, which seems like it might be handy at some point, and an ally's best friend, neither of which are applicable to this particular roll. So we're going to roll another d10. We're looking for 4 or less, and we have gotten a 3. So unlike the previous one where we put a trending counter on it, I think that this actually just goes down by 1, and then we have spent 1 more action point, giving us 15 points left. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to have the Secretary of Defense do one of the military master actions. This one, direct intel gathering ops against 2 different terror groups. And as before, we're going to do this in the Middle East as well. So we can do this in any activation segment in which military actions can be taken, and I think I can do that now. And as far as I can tell, I can. Now, I can, according to the explanation here, if our acting person has a +1 action on their token, then they can perform an additional action. So we're actually going to do this twice. We're going to select 2 terror groups, and for each one we roll a d10. So let's give these two guys up here, these 2 terror groups, and we're going to roll a d10. Now the DRMs is if there's a U.S. intel or advisors counter in the region, and there is, and another -1 if there's a focused national intelligence counter in the region, and there is. So we're going to roll twice. We're actually going to end up rolling 4 times, but let's do the first action first. So we're looking for a 1 through a 6. That is the case. So what happens now is we place them in the gathering intelligence box. So let's roll another one. Okay, that is a 7, slightly cocked, but we're calling that a failure. So let's do that action again. That is going to cost us. 1 action point, and let's just spend the other one right now too. That is a 10, so we're not getting that one, and that's a 2. So we did get 2 terror groups in the gathering intel box. So that later on potentially opens us up to move them up, or I can perform a raid or strike on them once I have them in the targeted, focused target box. All right, so the president himself is going to do a presidential presence diplomatic action, or domestic action, I should say. And this is a standard check track off that table, D18 that we saw before. And we don't have the orator or media savvy attributes. Indeed, I have just double-checked that, and we do not. But I do get an additional -1 if I spend an AP on it. And it costs 1 AP, so we're going to actually spend 2 APs on this to take us down to 11 action points. So that might be a risky move, but we're going to get a -1, so let's actually see what happens. All right, and we're rolling this against the prestige number, so we're looking for 6 or less, but I do have the -1 from spending the extra action point, so we're going to roll that, and we get a 10. So we have in fact pooped our pants on stage at the National Press Club, and we will get a -1 public approval. So there we go. Never fails for me to roll the worst possible result. So we got to keep the president out of the public eye because he is a clown. All right, it looks like we have another correction here. After rereading this twice, I don't know that I think this is crystal clear. It kind of is, but I'm kind of inferring that a natural 10 is a natural 10, and that's what you get. But I, of course, rolled a 10 and had the -1 AP, so I think my total is a 9. So I think my failed check but -10 is the condition that's triggered here, which means that prestige actually does not go down. It actually stays the same. So we are actually still at 40 presidential public approval. Now, the various members of the cabinet actually all have +1 action, so I could actually have taken 3 additional actions on this this round, but we've only got 11 action points left at this point, so we'll consider it a strategic decision to not do that instead of, oops, I forgot. So we will now then move, we're now actually going to move the turn sequence marker into activation phase 1, and that's going to be the end of this video. We will pick up activation phase 1 in the next video.